Aron Augustitus, the hockey video assistant for the Columbus Blue Jackets. First off, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. So it's really cool to chat with you. And before we kind of get into like the day to day of your role with the Jackets, I was curious your background. How did it all start? Did it all kind of come together for you?
Yeah. Originally from New Jersey, I grew up about 25 minutes outside New York City. Played hockey my whole life. I, in growing up playing hockey, refed hockey from when I was 14 years old. Was absolutely obsessed with it. So the ultimate goal was always, how do I make a career out of this? How do I find a way into it? Ever since I was a little kid, that's what it always was. So going to college, I went to Michigan State, and upon graduation of Michigan State, there was an internship opportunity with the Blue Jackets, and have since parlayed it into more and more of a role each year. So this past season was my fourth season there, but it all just started, kind of randomly on a whim, and we are where we are today now because of it.
That's awesome. So you said that you're from the Jersey area, right?
Yeah.
And you were also with the New York Jets, weren't you?
Yeah, so I did an internship with them one summer in their PR department. I worked in the Devils with their PR and Prudential Centers PR, and then I also did 2 summers at the French Open with NBC Sports in Paris. So a lot of those things kind of prepared me. While those weren't on the sports side of things, like as if what I'm doing today, hockey ops, but they really prepared me and showed me like how you work in professional sports, kind of the general idea of what goes on day to day in a building. So coming into Columbus, I was pretty comfortable because of those past experiences. But you don't really know what you're getting into until you're actually there. So it was helpful, but still learned a lot as soon as I got here too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, I feel like if you're coming from kind of like the New York, New Jersey market and different avenues like that, you're kind of getting a good firsthand look of everything, and then you kind of have, like you said, a good idea as you got to Columbus. So really neat that it all kind of worked out the way it did.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting growing up there with how many sports teams there are and how crazy people can be about it. So you're
Yeah.
definitely not lacking on the the intake of sports content throughout your life.
Exactly. And what was your major at Michigan State? Was it in this field or kind of a different field?
Absolutely has nothing to do with it. I was pre-law major and an econ minor at Michigan State. So as you can see, I'm putting those degrees to very good use right now.
I love it. I think it's awesome that you are where you are. And so, with the Blue Jackets, what's your typical day in the life, at least in season? And is this role full time or are you part time or
No, I'm full time. Yeah, like I travel with the
okay?
team, but this was my first full year traveling full time with the team. So I'm around every single day throughout the season.
That's really neat. So, yeah, so like a typical day in the life, like let's say on a game day or even on a off day, what's your typical routine? Or I know you're doing all kinds of obviously
Yeah.
video related type of things. So I know you have a different amount of tasks and things like that, probably with the coaching staff, players, working with Dan Singleton. So, what's your typical, I don't want to say 8 to 5 or whatever, but your typical day?
Yeah, so honestly, the thing that's interesting about just being on this side of things is while there's like, pretty standard things that may happen before and after each game, like every day is so different just because one day you're playing a game or one day you're traveling, one day you're at home, so it's the basis of a non game day is come in the morning, get whatever video coaches may need on the game from the night before, or as well as who we're playing next. If it's a back to back coming up, you're typically doing two teams at a time, just so that they have everything prior to the first of the back to back ending. Uh, it's but it's honestly always changing. Like there's no 2 days that end up being the same. Game days are pretty close to each other every single day. So come in meetings in the morning, go home, have lunch. Sometimes we'll skate if we're at home, and then meetings before the game, and then that's it. So game days are pretty regimented just with the schedules because of meetings and whatnot. But an off day or a practice day or travel day really just depends on when the next game is, whether it's back to back coming up. who we may be playing, whether it's someone that we've played recently, someone that we haven't played at all yet. Because when you've played teams pretty close, it makes it a bit easier to pre-scout them because you have your own games that you can work off of. Whereas, like, if you don't play a team from November till you don't play them again until March, they may not be doing the same kinds of things that they were doing at the beginning of the year. So you're getting a bit more video for that. But basically, it's just whatever the coaches may ask of me or need of me. That's what I typically try to do. I just try to be as much of a helping hand in as many areas as I possibly can, is basically the best way to put it. Whereas, like, Danny's always working on our even strength pre scout and he's always got his exact things. I'm kind of like I do the get the special teams videos for some of the coaches, and I also kind of just fill in, help where anyone may need help on that specific day.
Are off days in a sense maybe a little easier if you're able to maybe catch up and knock out things ahead of time, or is it just kind of depends on what's kind of happening at that point, like in the schedule in
Yeah,
the season?
exactly. Like, it really just depends on, is it a true off day where we don't have a game, for next day, next 2 days? Because then it's a true off day and we typically won't do anything. But is it an off day in the middle of a 3 and 4 set where it's like, yeah, on paper for the players it's an off day, but for us, like, it's any other normal day. So, but for me personally, like, it's nice to take some time off, but like when I'm in season, like, I'm so like, ingrained in what's going on that, like, I just want to be at the rink as much as I possibly can. So even when we have off days, and I'm not the only one on the coaching staff that does this, but like we're just in the office just because at that point it's like routine where it's like wake up, go to the rink. And you're just so used to it by the middle of the season. And in the beginning of the season, you're trying to get into that rhythm. So yeah. So there's a lot more days that you spend at the rink than it may show or you may anticipate throughout. But I honestly wouldn't have it any other way just because it makes it a lot easier to stay in the routine and get everything accomplished that you're looking for the upcoming week.
Do you have much of any hand in regards to like, replay review in game?
Basically, in game, the way that our setup works is Pascal Vincent's on the walkie-talkie on the bench. Kenny McCudden's on the walkie-talkie up watching the game in the stands or up in the press box, and then Dan and I are on one in the room. So Dan is live tagging the games, just saving the video, and then I'm watching the Hawkeye computer throughout the game, communicating with Kenny and with Pascal on the bench. If they see something that they want to like have checked, whether it's an entry while a play is going on or high stick that may have been missed, whatever it may be, that they'll point something out. I'll be looking for things on my own as well to see if I picked up on anything, and then if it comes down to a decision needs to be made. The offsides ones are typically, except for the one that we had this year against Ottawa, they're typically pretty black and white. It's offsides or it's not. Um, but like when it comes down to like goalie interference stuff, it typically becomes a conversation with Dan's on the mic, I'm on the mic, Pascal, like the three of us are all going and we're showing it to Brad Larson, and he's going to and ultimately make the final decision on whether or not we want to challenge it. But the physical, like when you see them looking down on the bench, like the screen that they're looking at is the computer that like I'm physically controlling in the back room.
Like, I'm just imagining because, like, we see all these replays on TV all the time. So,
Yeah,
is it stressful in that moment trying to be like, I mean, like you said, it might be black or white, so you might have a
yeah.
quick response or a quick answer, but I can imagine how it might be kind of stressful in the moment. You're trying to figure out like, should we like review this or not, and trying to get like the best angles or
Yeah, so for me personally, like hard decisions and like stressful moments, they don't like scare me. Like I feel like I thrive off that like adrenaline that you get in those kinds of
yeah,
situations. Um,
yeah.
but at the same time, you know, we're putting we're making a decision on what we want to do, but at the end of the day, like it's always put into the NHL and like the league's hands of what the ultimate decision is going to be. So the fear is less of, am I going to get this decision in time or am I going to get this out to the bench in time so that they can make the right call? And more of, are we going to get the results that we
Yeah.
want to be getting? So I don't have a fear, and it's it is a short amount of time, and there are moments where it's like we really are pressing because it's really tough to make a decision, um, but that doesn't scare me as much as like what the ultimate result of the challenge will be. That's where once we've made our decision of whether we're going to challenge, like, when you're not going to challenge, then it's like, whatever, you move on, keep playing the game. But once you've made your decision of when you're going to challenge, obviously we're pretty confident in it, but we're most scared about what the result is going to be more than anything.
I guess that makes sense though. In the moment, you're kind of like, okay. Sometimes it just seems like, let's just do it. Let's just challenge it. What do we
Well,
have to
yeah.
lose? Yeah,
So it's
there
really
might be
like
a
like
penalty.
there are certain situations in the game where like it makes, whether even if you're not sure about whether you're making the right call or not, like it just makes sense to make that call given like the circumstances, whether it's late in the game, you're losing, whatever it may be, like it's worth doing. Then there are other ones where it's like, if this was a different score, we probably would be trying this, but because it's the game is where it's at, like is it really worth us putting this risk out there? So that's that's where the decisions kind of come in. But that's ends up being Lars's decision. He's the one making the final call. So Dan and I's job is just give him the best information possible, give him our recommendation of what we think should be done, and then ultimately like let him have the final say because he's the head coach and he gets to do that.
Right. So in game, you said that you guys are basically like in like the like a back room, like the replay room, or an area like that
Yeah.
to watch the games and work.
Yeah, so on the road, like we're typically in the coaches, whatever coaches room they give us on the road. That's just where we're set up. But in our home rink, we have multiple rooms within our coaches area. So Dan and I have our own room where that's where we get all of our stuff done. So everything's all preset. It's there all season, and that's where we work from throughout the game.
How much of a challenge was it even last season or prior in terms of not traveling or just doing your job as you are now? I'm sure it's a lot looser restrictions anyway. So with the COVID side of things, so like how much more challenging was it in the prior seasons?
I have more responsibility this season than I did in the past seasons. Um, so I think from a job standpoint, the difficulty wasn't there because when the team would go on the road, I would do some stuff upstairs with Jim Beers is our scouting coordinator. I would do stuff with Josh Flynn. Like I would have other things that I'd be doing in the office, whereas like my job wasn't necessarily tailored strictly to like what the coaching staff is. So I was doing stuff for the coaches, but I could do them at my own kind of discretion. So it more was just like you don't feel as connected when you go down there because then for home games, like I'm doing the same thing during games this year as I was doing the past 3 seasons where I'm like in the room and whatnot. So you feel just a little bit more, little less or a little less connected with the team when you're not traveling with them. So that was the biggest thing for me this year was that like I felt way more involved in things, felt way more like I could speak up if someone asked me a question or whatever it may be.
You're kind of in like the unique scenario of already knowing, head coach Brad Larson because he was an assistant coach, last season, for instance, and beyond. So, you already kind of had a relationship with him, and if you can speak to it, was it much different actually working with John Tortorella as opposed to having Brad Larson as a head coach now? Was it more or less the same, or kind of different? I guess I could see where it'd be different from head coach to head coach anyway, but could
Yeah.
you kind of speak to kind of the differences or similarities there?
Yeah, so I personally didn't have a lot of interaction with torts. Like the couple of trips that I went on last year, I did, and then as the season progressed, like I was a bit more ingrained. But um, my experience with torts wasn't extended enough to really have like a crazy feel for like how it was. I saw what he did all the time, and I was always in awe of how he captured a room and how he conducted himself in the day to day that he went about. But my relationship with Lars is much different because I'm a lot closer with him than I ever was with Torts, even just in the year and a half that like I've been kind of hands on with Lars. Um, the way that he conducts a room and the way that the respect that he has of every single person in the organization is really what I am in awe of him. Like Lars is one of the most he's one of the most disciplined, like well put together people I've ever come across in my entire life. He has everything is so in front of him at all times. Like he's always thinking, he's always motivating those around him, and he's always doing it with a positive attitude. Like even when he's upset, he's trying to find ways to take positives out of it. And it's honestly it's amazing to watch him and how much he had our team grow from day one of training camp to the last end of the season, and how bought in he had every player throughout the season. Uh, Honestly, like, I can't speak enough about how much I learned from just watching him this year, and how nice it is to see a younger coach in the league come in and command the respect that he has. And it helps that he knew a lot of these guys, but at the same time, first head coaching job in the NHL, you never know how it's going to necessarily go. And he, for my money, was one of the best coaches in the NHL this year, and should get a little bit more recognition league wide for the job that he's done.
But yeah, it's really neat though to hear obviously from your personal lens of seeing the team every single day, being in the room or being around everybody, getting your perspective. I think it's neat to get that viewpoint from your side of things, the replay side of things that we are all more or less aware of just from what we see on TV, but we don't really
Yeah,
know necessarily the inner workings of it. You probably obviously doing all kinds of video and whatever the coaching staff essentially needs. Do you have like a favorite? Do you personally have a favorite analytical stat that you like more or
like I don't
yeah,
have a
yeah.
favorite, and I don't necessarily pick one. Like, in short, no. I would say as a staff and as an organization, like, we get reports obviously from our analytics guys before we have games. So looking at things as a whole can be helpful. I think that there are just a couple analytics like categories or statistics that can be helpful game to game, or if you're looking at a 10 game segment, whatever it may be. But at the same time, they can be very narrow in the scope of the game that each one of those cover. And I think it's a lot more useful to look at things as a whole, as opposed to picking out, one, two, three, four, five, whatever it may be, statistics or analytics that you want to make a judgment on a team or a player or whatever it is. So the short answer is no, I don't have a favorite, and I don't necessarily go have a go-to one that I look at. But I think in whether it's power play or PK or 5-on-5 game, like, looking, there are a couple key metrics that you may want to look at, but at the most part, like, looking at it as a whole is really the only way to get a good picture of what you're looking at.
When you watch hockey now as opposed to maybe before you got into this role, do you just I mean, I assume you probably just watch it kind of differently now, or do you see like things that maybe the average fan wouldn't have, of course, think about, notice, see? Like if you're just watching like the playoffs on TV right now, are you kind of looking at it maybe differently than most people might be?
I would say, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, I'm watching it to see, like, what neutral zone forechecks are they running? What set breakouts are they running? What kind of D zone coverage are they running? What face off? Like, I'm looking at, like, from a very systematic standpoint now, whereas opposed to, like, growing up, and I was always like, oh, that was an awesome play, or what like a move that guy put on, what a goal, like, goal is scored, and I'm thinking, okay, like, where did that play start? Not how did it finish? What caused that play? Was it coming off a turnover? Was it coming off of a breakout? Whatever it may be. So I would say uh, there anyone who's in my position or in a coaching position, even not at the NHL level, even if it's AAA coaches or coaches coaching youth hockey, whatever it may be, you inherently look at things differently just because of what you're doing with your own team, and what you're constantly. Now, us, obviously, like, it's a much different level of it because we're living and breathing it every single day. And like, a lot of what Dan and I's job is to break down other teams and what they're doing. So when you're doing that for a job, it's almost impossible to turn it off when I'm just like
Right.
watching a game. My once it's a bit easier, like, when we get closer to, like, the cup finals, and, like, it's been the summer a little bit, like, you can kind of turn it off and, like, turn, like, the hockey fan on. But, like, right now, still, like, I'm watching games, and, like, my mind is running just like at a million miles an hour still, and it'd be the same difference if I was watching it for a pre-scout of someone.
Now that it's the off season for the Blue Jackets, how like what's the summers like for you now? Are you still having I guess you still have specific things that you might be working on maybe for next season or what's the typical off season like for you?
Yeah, so I try to be helpful with like the draft stuff. Um,
Okay.
Most of the coaches, go home and they kind of do their own thing. And, you're always watching hockey. You're always like thinking about little projects you maybe want to work on. Everyone kind of does it differently. But for me, like I'll go in a little bit, help out with our draft prep, um, go to the draft in July, help out with development camp after the draft. But for the most part, like I really don't have much to do outside of like if there's little projects I want to work on myself, or if in prep for the draft, like I like to watch the guys that we're thinking about drafting or we have on our list because when we talk about them, like I like to be a little bit more familiar with them than I may be at this very moment. So summer is really just help out a little bit for the draft, and then after the draft and development camp, it's kind of get ready for training camp, but also kind of enjoy the last kind of month or so before we really kick it back into gear because that's the one thing that is nice about this job is that from when, well, for me it's like when we go to Traverse City for the prospects until our season is over, and hopefully it's in June coming up next year. So take advantage of the time that you get off when you can, because when you're in it, like there's no turning it off. So really just kind of go after it. But at the same time, like this was always like a dream of mine to do all this stuff, right? So like I'm just a kid that's like living out his dream. So I feel weird not being at the rink in the summertime. So I don't necessarily know if I have to be there, if I have to be helped, but I just want to be there. And I'm very grateful for like, for Yarmo and for Basil and for Josh, who really give me the opportunity to kind of do these things throughout the year. And they believed in me to give me this position. So I try to just make sure that I'm paying that back to them and working hard enough to, because they have that belief in me. So I want to make sure that they know that it was worth it.
Yeah, when you're talking about when you're watching games and you're thinking about, breakouts and how the play started, it just makes me think of Jody Shelley when he's breaking down, or John Lee Grandpierre when they're breaking down highlights, things like that. They show where the things, where play started before the goal, like you were talking about. I'm sure you get to interact with them pretty often, or at least, of course, throughout the season. So I'm sure that they're having played in the game and now they cover it, on the media side of things, and they're dealing, they have, I'm sure, great perspective. That's probably helped you too, right?
So yeah, so the one that's unfortunate thing for me is intermissions. Like we're doing a lot of stuff, right? Like pregame, we're doing a lot of stuff. So I don't hear a lot of what John Luke gets to talk about, just because we're always. But being that like we're watching our TV broadcast, it's Jody. We always have the volume on because Jody is helpful when they're talking about the play and what's going on. If we're checking something and the play is going on and we hear their voice, like it's helpful for us. So seeing things broken down and knowing that like that's kind of how we would talk about them too. It is nice hearing Jody throughout the games, and yeah, and he's awesome at what he does, and you see it when he's on TNT now, and he's on NHL
Yep.
Network and he's all over the place. So uh, people are outside are recognizing it too, but it's nice to be able to live that on a game to game basis and listen to him. And now he's getting the recognition nationally that he deserves.
I guess, like, you probably love preseason as much as, let's say the coaching staff does, because that gives you a chance to kind of get back into it, before it gets real. Like, I
Yeah,
what is it kind of a weird adjustment going from summer to like just the first couple preseason games to just kind of get back in the routine of game and kind of getting, because you want to be as sharp as you can be anyway, right? In games,
yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, so I definitely like the one in the past. It's definitely like this year, especially like coming into it, it was nice to have those. You also don't wish the preseason like by like game 4 in preseason, you're like, all right, like I'm good to go. Like let's get this thing going. But the first couple of games, it's awesome. The one thing that's nice about this summer though is we're actually switching our video software over to a new company, so we're able to kind of work with it the whole summer. So I think preseason is going to be a bit more hectic in the sense that like we haven't used this program like in a live game yet. So it'll be nice for that, but we'll also be a lot more in tuned with working because we have to get used to this program throughout the whole summer. So there's a good into it, and there's also the bad. Like the first game, I already am, it's a little scared. We used it a little bit towards the end of the season on our own, but not to like a full scale operation. So it'll be nice to kind of work out those kinks at the beginning, but it also will be a bit more, refined going into the season as opposed to like a normal season when you come in training camp and then it's like, oh, haven't done this in 3 months. Like I
Yeah.
got to get back to it now. So there's a positive and a negative to this offseason with switching over to the new program that we're going to use, but we're very excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Aaron, thanks for chatting with me. It was great to hear kind of like your, this the scope of what it's like from your side of things and, from the video room rather. Really cool to chat with you and learn more about everything that you do. And I hope you have a good rest of the off season. And I know you're looking to get back, to the rink as soon as possible.
Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun.